Bob Grant's voice reminded you of your grandfather. Bob Grant's words also reminded you of your grandfather. An angry conservative whose opinion was always at the forefront of whatever topic or take was in the hopper. He was built for New York City and New York City radio.
Not really. You can't put on the air, you can't put it on what I do 5 days a week, 4 hours each day, year in, year out. You cannot manufacture that. I don't care. I don't think Laurence Olivier could do that. No, the people here on WMCA is really me. It's a side of me, it's true. When I'm off the air, I'm usually rather quiet. I usually listen. I found that I can do more listening and therefore more learning off the air. A guy told me once a long time ago, a fellow who was very instrumental in the way I developed my style in this format of radio. He said, you were given 2 ears and only 1 mouth, so do twice as much listening as you do talking.
And during a time in New York City where the eldest son of one of Grant's most vocal opponents and targets is running a strategy that would look for Grant's validation and endorsement more than run from it, it seems like the right time to lock in on the man who told disagreeing or boring or loud or stupid listeners to get off his phone, or the man who called a sitting mayor a washroom attendant, or hurled Italian insults at a man who would one day look to silence him for his antagonism. Historically speaking, I'm Matt Ryan, and this is the secret American history of the fathers of conservative talk and 2 real sons of bitches, Joe Pyne and Bob Grant. Despite looking and sounding like the dean of a college in a 1970s sex comedy, or the guy at every diner ever who wants his eggs runny, but not too runny, Bob Grant was not the product of 2 waspy New Jersey or Connecticut magnates, but instead born Robert Ciro Gigante on March 14, 1929, in Chicago, Illinois. Gigante was a wonderkind in the burgeoning medium of radio, as by the time he was roaming the halls at Steinmetz High School, he was auditioning for the Chicago Public Schools Central Radio Workshop, where he would appear as a cast member in various plays airing on WBEZ. He would carry that passion to his time at the University of Illinois, where while at Urbana, he worked at the radio station, and after a phone call meant for his roommate, he would land himself a gig, landing his first on-air news report on May 14, 1948, where he would announce the formation of the Nation of Israel. He would continue to act briefly, but following that first on-air shift, he would leave college and start work at WBBM, where he was forced to abscond with his birth surname in favor of Grant, as radio jocks, much like actors of the stage and screen or pro wrestlers of that era, would need to change their name to fit what was being presented on screen and over the airway. For Grant, it was not about being a firebrand in the beginning, but as when he landed at KNX AM in Los Angeles in 1959, he would partner with Phil Condellis for the Condellis and Grant Comedy Show, who were known as Outstanding, and a pair of dialecticians from Chicago who specialized in a form of comedy that is most popular today, satire. So Bob Grant, much like Joe Rogan and all those who came after him, tried to hack it first as a comedian. But then life would take a turn, as Grant would end up the sports director of competing WABC in Los Angeles, but then tragedy and opportunity would soon walk hand in hand into Grant's life.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
While Grant would be known as the standard for his longevity in the country's biggest market, the man who would be the Ra's al Ghul to his Batman, the Palpatine to his Anakin, the ayahuasca to his Joe Rogan, would be the forefather of this whole thing, Joe Pyne.
Good evening. One of our guests tonight, a scientist, says that we're all doomed in the next 50 years. I'm Joe Pyne, and the action starts in just a moment.
Joe Pyne was born the son of a bricklayer and also would have a stutter that would compound him until, after earning a Purple Heart from combat in Okinawa during World War II, he would find his voice and lose his stutter by attending drama school. Then, finding his way through the world of radio, he rose through the ranks by being known as the first person to take phone calls on the air, first explaining what the caller was saying as somewhat of a translator, then evolving to have the receiver held up to a microphone. So if you've ever called WFAN drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning, or sober, complaining about Hal Steinbrenner or Brian Cashman, you have Joe Pyne to thank.
Thank you very much.
Pro-union, but very conservative, Pyne, during his time in Kenosha, would get his first real taste of success, but also show a caustic streak that would define him, as when he would be denied a raise by his boss in Kenosha, he not only grabbed his boss by the lapels, but also threw a whole-ass typewriter against the wall. He would then end up in Delaware near his home state of Pennsylvania, where a marriage to a beauty queen and a left leg that was injured in the war would soon be severed. By 1951, Pyne would be divorced, and weeks after that, the left leg was removed, and then a few weeks after that, he'd be back on the air utilizing a prosthetic leg. Pyne would never mention, acknowledge, or even try to talk about having a prosthetic leg publicly for the rest of his life, except for during this one moment when a guest brought it up on his show. So there is no actual audio of this. Frank Zappa allegedly said something, but we can't find any audio. This is from the September edition, the 37th edition of the Fifth Estate magazine by Alan Katzman, September 1st through 15th, 1967. And this will be in the show notes. Paul Krasner was supposed to appear on the Joe Pyne show Sunday, July 16th, my birthday. But the tape was never shown. Paul had doubts that Pyne would show the tape even though his guest appearance was announced in the TV section of every paper. As Paul tells it, the producer of the show explained, if Joe don't like it, Joe won't show it. The reason why it wasn't shown was that Pyne got a lot of his own shit thrown in his face, and it was Krasner who supplied the pitching arm. During the middle of the interview with Krasner, Pyne reverted to his true form, an obnoxious pig posing as a human, and made horrible allusions to Paul's acne scar. It was really bad for a couple of minutes until Krasner calmly interrupted his venom and said, "Tell me, Joe, when you go home at night, do you take off your wooden leg before you make love to your wife?" Pyne has a wooden leg due to an injury in World War II, always was under the impression it was his head. The exchange did not sit too well with Pyne, who for 5 whole minutes was catatonic to say the least. It looked bad for Paul when a couple of Pyne's followers started yelling, "That's not fair, that's not fair," and Pyne had a look in his eye as if he was going to take off his wooden leg and beat Paul over the head with it. But nothing happened, and that's the inside scoop on how Mother Goose got her balls cut off. Also, at one point, I think Krasner said, "Does you having a wooden leg make you a table?" Divorced and sans his left leg below the knee, Pyne found himself in the home market of the angry and divorced, Philadelphia, or more specifically Atlantic City, and by 1953, Pyne would grow more conservative, being jubilant at the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, proclaiming, "We finally incinerated those commies." While in Atlantic City, Pyne would find himself going from a regular DJ, playing records and only talking every once in a while, to a fully fledged talk personality with his boss at the station imploring him to stop playing records and just talk. Soon it would be television and not just radio that Pyne would draw ire on, but he would initially flop in Philadelphia before hosting a radio version of his TV show It's Your Nickel in Riverside, California, and exposing a narcotics scandal at a local high school that would turn into a bidding war for Pyne's services, where he'd be lured away to KTLA in Los Angeles, where he'd be making $1,000 a week, or just over $11,254 in 2025 money. More than what Mickey Mantle, the highest paid athlete in the country, was being paid at the time, to tell his callers to gargle with razor blades. In Pyne's 1970 obituary in the New York Times, it would list a quote that is basically saying the quiet part out loud, stating that he did not want intellectual exercises on his programs. "The subject must be visceral," he said once. "We want emotion, not mental involvement." Well, fuck, just give away the whole game then, Joe. Good lord. But soon, even though he was making more money than Mickey Mantle, he would return to Delaware as a family member would draw ill. Soon he would bounce back to Montreal, but back to Los Angeles. He was drawn there in 1960, where 3 years later he and Bob Grant would cross paths. And before we move back onto Bob Grant, holy shit did all of conservative content just swagger jack Joe Pyne. Whether it's Morton Downey's use of audience asking questions and audacious guests across all cultural, social, and societal backgrounds into a bonkers shouting match full of spite and venom. It's something that was aped by Charlie Kirk, and now for some reason our vice president, in terms of the podium and controversial style of confrontation in content. Then you have the Joe Rogan-esque we're just asking questions and embrace debate style that's nearly 40 years before Stephen A. Smith was on every possible form of media outside of slam poetry and Who's-Could-Do fanzines. Either way, Pyne, much like Rogan hosted a game show on NBC, was the catalyst for Bob Grant's career, as Pyne was not allowed on the air following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. That's right, dude hated JFK so much that after he was killed, they thought if he went on the air, Pyne was going to do a victory lap around our dead president. Imagine, just imagine for a second, if any of that happened today. Any of that. Either way, the moment would propel Grant into the spotlight as Pyne would become more caustic and controversial until lung cancer would take him in 1970. Pyne and Grant would soon be competitors, though. By 1964, Pyne would move away from KABC on his road to NBC and being syndicated in 1966. Grant would develop his bona fides at KABC, interviewing Muhammad Ali, the founder of Kwanzaa, Ron Maluna Karenga, and he credits himself as the first man to interview Ronald Reagan, not as an actor, but as a politician.
What I heard coming in here, it had to do with the unfairness, as you say, of someone enlisting for a branch and not getting it, and I agree myself. I think it's just that there's a certain percentage of error and human error that go in an organization as big as the military, and I think it's wrong. What you've said is wrong, but someplace along the line, somebody probably loused up or goofed, and I know what happens when the wheels begin to move from World War II, when it was a lot bigger with 14 million in the service. And you, now and then, a fella can rectify this because he happens to get into an outfit where there's a commanding officer who listens to his story, looks at the record and says, you're right, and this ought to be corrected. But a lot of times that doesn't happen, and it's just the, when a movement that big takes place, the individual's kind of, he's subject to these errors and these things that happen. But I've got to go along with you, and I'm going to tell you something else. I, for a long time, have been urging that we should investigate what we could do to step up enlistments and see if we could not phase down, if not out, a draft, because I have a terrible fear. You know, there was a fellow named Lenin many years ago who said that one of the things that he would use against the so-called capitalist nations is to try and force them into permanent compulsory military service and thus make the uniform a symbol of servitude instead of a symbol of...
By 1967, Grant would join Pyne on KLAC, but only last until 1969, when the format would flip to music. Grant then took his talents to television, hosting a show called Tempo with Gene Baird, and soon found himself replaced by Regis Philbin, as controversies, including his being offensive to Marlo Thomas, saw him fired in July of 1970. But that would create opportunity for Jack Thayer, yes, the same man who found and launched the nascent career of Don Imus just a few years earlier in Sacramento, was in New York and wanted to bring Bob Grant with him. On September 21st, 1971, Grant would launch his program at WMCA in New York. But the problem is, he hated New York. Hated it. Looking to get fired by his current boss, R. Peter Strauss, Grant would become more caustic to his callers, but as we've seen with Imus, Opie and Anthony, and the litany of dyed-in-the-wool conservative talkers like Sean Hannity, and the rage-bait culture we currently live in, it only increased his ratings and made him more popular, if not infamous, in the New York market. In an interview under a year into his time at WMCA, Grant was quoted as saying, "LA radio is really hip compared to New York. Here, the scene is very provincial and ethnic and liberal. Being a conservative, I'm referred to by most of my callers as the house right-winger, or fascist. Actually, it gets pretty funny because they do more yelling at me than engaging in useful debate. The audience in Los Angeles was much more sophisticated. Since WMCA started dialogue radio, it really shot up in the rankings. We've gone from around 12th to 3rd in the market. Extend his animosity for public officials, including New York State Representative Ben Rosenthal, who in March of 1973 was leading a boycott of the eating of meat. Rosenthal would then cancel an invitation to appear on Grant's show and then have himself being called a coward by Grant for not appearing. Rosenthal would then file a complaint with the Federal Communications Commission, which, after ending up at the United States Court of Appeals, would see Grant and WMCA get a victory due to Grant offering the congressman an invitation to appear on the show, following the equal time provision. Grant was also the mind behind the Gree puzzle, which was a word game that would be based around the concept of there are 3 words in the English language that end in Gree, that's G-R-Y. 2 of them are angry and hungry. What's the 3rd? Speaking of which, while at WMCA, a female listener called Grant inquiring about pornographic films, and then decided to invite this woman and 99 other female listeners to join him at a Times Square porn theater. And then he brought a focus group back to the station to discuss what was seen, which was done 3 times before Grant left for WOR on Memorial Day of 1977. That period would see Grant gain a 24.3 share, where 1 in 4 New Yorkers would be listening to Grant. And it would only last until 1979, where Grant would later tell on his blog that Roger Ailes, that's right, Roger Ailes, would run Grant out of town and later ban Grant from Fox News. Now at a passage from Bob Grant's blog in 2011. At the time, Roger just left producing The Mike Douglas Show, which was syndicated out of Philadelphia. Roger was looking for new vistas to conquer since he had expressed a high opinion of. I was not surprised he wanted to have me join a roundtable show at CBS. I do not know what exactly he had in mind for me. I never got to find out because my big mouth caused me to be persona non grata at CBS, and especially with Roger Ailes. What was the problem? Fate and my big mouth foreclosed all chances for me. You see, just prior to Rogers calling me, I had done my nightly show on WOR, and a caller phoned into the show saying he was upset with a woman who was blaming the police for what happened to her sons. I had read the story the man was referring to and noted that the woman who was very angry with the police was the public relations director or community relations director of WCBS News Radio. I stupidly asked the caller if he knew how she got that job. The caller said he didn't know, and I promptly and arrogantly said, I will tell you how. She passed the gynecological and pigmentation test, that's how. Not only did that turn off Roger Ailes, but WOR was forced to fire me, even though I had given the radio giant the biggest overnight ratings they ever had. As I sit here typing this, I can't believe I did such a stupid thing. At the time of the firing, there were many real friends in the city who tried to intervene. One was Irving Goldman, who was the Commissioner of Community Affairs. He devoted all of his time and considerable clout to try to fix the issue, but to no avail. Whatever Irving and Jerry Priceman and many other real friends tried to do, the worse the situation became. I was lucky that the #1 talk station in Philadelphia wanted me, and so I went to that station and was greeted by Mayor Frank Rizzo, who would appear on my program when he boycotted all the others. If I weren't so lazy, I would write an autobiography about my life and the inside workings of this phenomenon called telephone talk radio. There have been other occasions where my big mouth got me into trouble, but being blackballed by Fox has been the most painful. So Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes. The dude that made Fox News. Hated him. But the man who bombed his own citizens loved him. I don't know how to parse all that. I don't. We just got to get back. I'm going to get back to the story because I don't know how the fuck that. How are you that polarizing of a human being? Where equally I just fuck, bro. So yeah, Grant gets fired from New York, lands in Philly, and ends up back in New York for WMCA in 1980, before Grant would land his nightly spot on WABC in 1984, and then gain the afternoon drive time spot where Grant would volley his most acidic jabs at New York Mayor David Dinkins while he was running against Rudolph Giuliani, calling the incumbent mayor, the city's first African-American mayor, a washroom attendant, and then calling then-Governor Jim Florio Flim Flam Florio in hopes to get Christine Todd Whitman elected in 1994. And then there was the big fish, New York Governor Mario Cuomo, a fellow Italian that Grant would attack in Italian using the phrase facim. And then there was the New York Magazine cover that had Grant adorned in a WABC flag. And then when the cover came out, a part of a dual cover, he looked like a Klansman with the headline, "Why He Hates Blacks" on the cover. So, and I recommend reading this article because you get an insight on Grant that really shows the metastasization of conservative talk. You see how he and Rush Limbaugh used a lot of the same language to try and protect themselves. You see how he was big business. He was billing $7 million a year in 1996 in ad sales. That is an insane amount of money and an insane opportunity for a radio station at that time for their afternoon drive. And goes into the things he would say and how blatant and just ensconced that cultural elitism and racism and classism and culturism there is. Ed Koch going after him, Mario Cuomo backsiding it by saying his show is cathartic, but also admitting that he's kind of a pig. Here's a quote. Mario Cuomo regards the Bob Grant show as a form for catharsis, and that is precisely what disturbs him about it. Rectorial violence, he says, does encourage, and it gets cyclical and retaliatory. It does also promote an attitude of saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with being filled with hate. There's so much of it around. That one, that one is funny about 30 years later. According to Grant's former boss at WABC, John Minnelli, it was pressure from both New Jersey Senator Frank Lautenberg and then New York Governor Mario Cuomo, who both drew the ire of Grant, who put the pressure on WABC to fire him. Cuomo, who we mentioned earlier, shared Italian heritage with Grant and once shared a bond between one another, where Cuomo would appear on Grant's shows starting in the 1970s when Cuomo was running for mayor against Ed Koch and his son Andrew was running the Vote for Cuomo, not the Homo operation. And they were friendly up until 1986 when, during an appearance on Grant's show, Cuomo would be asked why Cuomo needed such a large war chest when he was running against Andrew O'Rourke, who ended up losing by over 20%. Cuomo would end up hanging up on him, and from that point, it was a vendetta that Cuomo and Grant would hold on to, and possibly could have caused the sunsetting of Cuomo's career as governor 9 years later, with Grant's overwhelming support of George Pataki. So much so that Grant's fans would call in with the Mario salute, which was, and pardon my terrible Italian, Mario assenzami tu si un proprio facim, which roughly translates to, Mario, listen to me, you're a real lowlife. And then there was the song.
All right, Marty, if you will, please.
Mario assenzami tu si un proprio facim. He can run New York State, but all the streets are full of hate. When he comes to town, here is what we say. Mario assenzami tu si un proprio facim. Mario, Mario, Mario.
All right, we aim to please. You know, listening to Marty's theme song, that's the gentleman who did this song. I think it would be great if we could get an ensemble. And when the campaign really gets going, in late summer, early fall, to have a group of musicians. And anytime the spatchim is being introduced at a rally or anywhere like that, so that the spatchim doesn't feel too as though he's being treated inhospitably, they would do that would be his theme song. And it's a very good idea. Then the audience would all chant. Can you imagine? Matter of fact, I think we have a group right here. This group that we do have here According to the information I have, this group delivered a message to Mario on November 6th. This was the first mass group. November 6th, 1992, in the Grand Ballroom of the Nevele Hotel up there in the Catskills. All I did was ask some 2,850 people. I said, how do you feel about the Sfacim? And without any prompting to speak of from me, here was their response. And he is, of course.
Hold on. Mario, haciéndome su propio Sfacim.
4 years old. That's very, very good. Very good. And he is.
He hated that motherfucker. He hated him more than this city hates Cuomo's son now. This is some generational hatred. God damn. But, yeah, Bob Grant's still an asshole. Because on April 3rd, 1996, an airplane crash would involve then Commerce Secretary Ron Brown. Grant, remarking to future Newsmax personality and then caller to Grant's show from Oyster Bay, Long Island, Carl Limbacher, that he had a hunch that Brown is the one survivor. I just have that hunch. Maybe it's because at heart I am a pessimist. 2 weeks after that, and after Brown had been found to have perished in the accident, a campaign was started to take Grant off the air, and Grant would be fired from WABC. Just to get hired back by WOR for 10 years, and then rotating guest spots, and then a shocking return to WABC, and then working off and on until July 28th, 2023, where he retired from basically doing everything, and then would pass away on New Year's Eve of 2013 at the age of 84, with his wig being 33. The man who shaped the concept of talking to people on the radio, who was also a man who called Martin Luther King Jr. a slimeball, on top of dozens of other slights, insults, and indignities he would pile upon public figures, callers, or anyone else in his path of rage, now exists as nothing more than a forgotten template to a playbook, ran voraciously and somewhat sociopathically through a multiplicity machine that permeates the form. On the next edition of Historically Speaking, we meet the man who took all of the raw clay we've formed over the last 3 episodes, turned it into a movement and a media empire that still subsists him and dozens of others, 40 years since landing on the New York airwaves and setting everything on fire. We meet the king of all media, Ben and Ray's son, motherfucking fart man himself, Howard Stern, next time on Historically Speaking. Historically Speaking is a production of Ember Media, and thank you to our fine patrons and our $5 subs who make these videos possible. See you next time. Bye!